Okay, so we've talked a little bit about hiding and showing axes and the grid. We've talked about creating some basic objects. Uh, we've talked about the graphics view and the algebra view and the input bar at the bottom of the screen. We're going to talk a little bit more about now, in this uh, module, is a bit about some different tool options you have in the toolbar, and with the emphasis on changing attributes of objects that you create using the object properties window. So to begin, I want to share with you some techniques I use to create a self-portrait of myself. I'm actually going to use some of these conic section tools. Notice here I can use an ellipse tool. One thing I find handy is whenever you select a tool from the toolbar, you get some information over here on the right that tells you what to do. This says for an ellipse, you select two foci and then a point on the ellipse. So I'm going to be clicking first the two foci and then select a point that will lie on the ellipse, and I'll click to create that point. So now I have an ellipse. I'd like to create some eyes. I'm going to use the new point tool to do that. Here's my eyes. Under the circle tool, you'll see all these different tools here. I'm going to use a circumcircular arc through 3 points to create a nose and a mouth. And basically that's my face. Now the problem here that you might see is that all these points are labeled, and that kind of gets in the way. There's no color in my face to speak of, and there's some points here I really don't want to see. So what I'm going to do to correct all these things, to sort of enhance my drawing, is to right click on a Mac, control click on any of the objects and pick object properties. What that'll do is bring up this object properties dialog box. Basically any object I've created so far appears on the left hand portion of this object properties window. And as I hover over different objects, you'll notice that they're highlighted in the drawing. Notice that when I hover over A is highlighted in the graphics view, etc., etc. Now, like as for point A, I really don't want that to appear in my drawing. So I could highlight A and then click delete. Unfortunately, A was a key point of my ellipse, so that kills the frame that was bounding my face. So I'd like to undo that. You can click on this button here, the undo button. That brings my face back. I'm going to drag my face over here again. Notice I can do that by highlighting all the objects and clicking on them and dragging. So I don't really want to delete point A. If I right click on A and pick object properties, instead of deleting A, I'm just going to hide it. So you'll notice that there are these sort of greenish filled in circles to the left of each object that I've created. If you click on that, the little green region, that toggles the visibility of the object. Notice that's equivalent to clicking on the Show Object checkbox under the Basic tab. Somehow I kind of like clicking on that shaded circle better. I'm not sure why. There are many ways to do the same thing in the software. Okay, so notice I've gotten rid of the extraneous points that I really don't want on my drawing. The points that remain all have these pesky labels with them. So in fact, by highlighting all the points, I can do that. I can do that by clicking on the word point. Notice all the points in the graphics view are highlighted. And if I uncheck the show label box, all the labels are hidden. So that's really handy. I don't want any of the labels to appear. So that's good. My drawing's looking a little better. I noticed that these points on my nose, it'd kind of be nice just to hide those. So I've forgotten what they are, but if I hover over the point in the graphics view, I can see it over here, and vice versa. So I'm going to hide point F and H and I and probably K. There we go. That really is starting to look like a face. The eyes, they look a little beady to me. I'd like my eyes to be a bit larger. So if you click on the eyes, I can hold shift down and select both of the eyes at once. And under style, I can make the point size larger. That gives me really big eyes. And I have actually brown eyes, so by clicking on the color tab with the 2 points highlighted, I can change their color. So the eyes are a little large, so I can drag there and make them a bit smaller. I can also make my eyes look like this if I'm asleep, or open like that. You have some options with the different shapes here. Okay, now in terms of my face, I look rather pale right now. If you click on the ellipse itself, notice it highlights the outer frame of my face, but in fact, I can also shade in the interior of the ellipse by choosing the opacity feature. Right now, the opacity of the color is 0. If I drag on this slider a bit, I can shade in the face. And I don't really want a face this dark. My face isn't very pink either. How about more of a sort of tan, brownish face? That looks good. And so we can change that style here. And by dragging on opacity, we can make the face darker or lighter. This looks good to me. By the way, you can also, by clicking on the inverse filling option, fill in everything outside of the ellipse rather than inside. You can fill in with a hatch or an image. I prefer the standard style. That'll work for me. You can change the line thickness, in other words, the boundary of the ellipse, by dragging on this slider. The line style can be a closed, solid shaded line, or a dotted one, very small dotted. You have a lot of options here. Okay, a couple other little features I'd like to share because I think they're kind of powerful. They're going to help us with our later work. Is if you go underneath the new point tool, actually find this tool called Point on Object. What this will let us do is create points that lie on an object. So let's say I want some points along my lips of my ellipse. By the way, these lips, I'm going to change the color of those. Let's put some points on here. My lips are a little chapped, and so this will help me illustrate that better in my self-portrait. Let's put a few points here. I have some freckles. Now what's interesting, if I drag on these points, like point L, it is hinged onto my lips. I cannot drag the point off. It's a point on that arc. Point P I've constructed to be on the ellipse. So no matter what I do, I can't drag it outside that boundary. And that's actually handy things. Notice that these are also labeled. I don't like that. So by right-clicking on the object, picking Object Properties again, I can highlight all the points and make sure that no labels are visible at all. These ones that are blue, Notice these four, I think they're these down here. I can select individual items by control clicking on them here in the menu. Let's make these a bit smaller. So I can go to the Style tab like I did before, make them smaller points, change their color. I'll make them sort of pinkish. Last thing I'd like to do is make my lips a little bit thicker. So I can click on that arc, go to Style, and make the line thickness quite a bit thicker. My lips are kind of a red color, so I'll pick the red option there. Basically, there's my face. I have to mention the measurement tool as well. If you go over here, there's a button. Initially, it looks like an angle. These have all the different measurement options underneath. And so we could actually find the area of my face. Can drag these around. We could find the perimeter of my face. And these are all dynamic. If I choose to actually show point A again and drag A around, notice that the area and the circumference change dynamically. So it's really kind of nifty. So just in summary, by selecting the object and right-clicking on it, going to Object Properties, you can change quite a few attributes of the objects within your graphics view. By clicking on these different tabs, you can determine whether or not an object is visible or not. Under the Color tab, you can change the color of the objects. Under the Style tab, you can change the size of objects, the shading. The various options are determined by the object you have highlighted. For instance, the ellipse has a filling attribute, whereas the point A does not. That's about it. Just remember that object properties are awfully powerful, and we'll explore these in more depth in later modules, so keep these in mind.